My name is Amanda Williams, and I'm 26 years old. 10 months of my life vanished while I was in a coma after a car accident. I woke up alone, abandoned by my parents who had emptied my bank accounts, sold my home, and stolen my identity. The hospital staff became my family when blood relatives disappeared. When my parents finally saw me again in court, they physically collapsed at the sight of me standing there, alive, determined, and ready for justice. Before I dive into this nightmare, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever felt betrayed by family. Trust me, what happened next still haunts me today. Before my world shattered, I had what I thought was a picture-perfect relationship with my parents, Morgan and Richard Williams. We had Sunday dinners together almost every week. Mom would cook her famous pot roast, and Dad would talk about his woodworking projects. They seemed so proud of me. "Our little genius," Dad would say, ruffling my hair even though I was well into adulthood. Mom would show my childhood photos to anyone who visited their home. I believed they were my biggest supporters. I had built a good life for myself. After graduating with a computer science degree, I landed a job as a software developer at Tech Fusion, a promising startup in Boston. The hours were long, but the work was fulfilling, and my salary reflected my value to the company. At 26, I was already making six figures and had been promoted twice. My team respected me, and my bosses saw potential in me. I was on track for a senior developer position within the next year. Financially, I was responsible. I had a modest but comfortable one-bedroom apartment in Cambridge that I'd decorated with care. My furniture wasn't expensive, but it was mine, chosen piece by piece. The blue velvet couch had been my first major purchase after getting hired. My bookshelves overflowed with programming manuals and fantasy novels. On my walls hung framed photographs I'd taken during a solo trip to Iceland the previous year. I had nearly $100,000 in savings, an impressive 401k for someone my age, and I'd recently taken out a comprehensive life insurance policy worth $500,000. "You're too young to worry about that," Mom had said when I mentioned it, but I explained that it was a benefit through work and seemed sensible. I never imagined it would become the target of their greed. My boyfriend Brian and I had been together for 2 years. He was a graphic designer who worked from home most days. We met at a coffee shop when his laptop died, and he asked to borrow my charger. Our relationship wasn't perfect. We occasionally argued about his messy habits or my workaholic tendencies, but we loved each other. We were discussing moving in together soon. Brian was supportive, kind, and honest. Everything my parents turned out not to be. Looking back, there were small signs I missed. Dad calling to ask about investment advice more frequently. Mom mentioning their second mortgage. The time they asked if they could be added to my bank account just in case of emergency. I politely declined that request, explaining that I could set up a specific emergency fund for them if needed. They backed off, and I thought nothing more of it. The day before the accident was a Saturday. My parents invited me over for an early dinner. In retrospect, their questions seemed suspicious, asking about my life insurance details, wondering about my retirement accounts, questioning whether my company had good disability coverage. At the time, I thought they were just being parents, concerned about my welfare. "You should really give us copies of your important documents," Mom suggested while serving apple pie. "In case anything happens." "I have everything organized in a secure cloud account," I told them. "And my lawyer has copies." I didn't actually have a lawyer then. That small lie might have been what saved me from even worse financial ruin later. As I drove home that night, I called Brian to tell him I was on my way to his place. That was my last memory before everything went dark. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit my car on the driver's side at nearly 60 miles per hour. The impact was so severe that first responders had to cut me out of the vehicle. According to the medical reports I later read, I arrived at Massachusetts General Hospital with severe head trauma, internal bleeding, and multiple fractures. The doctors performed emergency surgery to relieve pressure on my brain, but the trauma was too extensive. I fell into a deep coma. No one knew if I would ever wake up. The first few weeks after my accident, my parents were fixtures at the hospital. The nurses told me later that my mother would sit by my bed for hours, stroking my hair and talking to me. My father paced the hallways, harassing doctors for updates and prognoses. They brought flowers that wilted and were replaced. They put up photos of me smiling from happier times. According to the visitor logs, Brian came every day after work, often staying until the nurses gently asked him to leave at the end of visiting hours. By the second month, the staff noticed a change. My parents' visits became shorter and less frequent. Their questions shifted from "when will she wake up" to "what are the chances she'll ever recover?" The flowers stopped being replaced. The vigil was waning. Nurse Elaine Martinez became my primary caregiver and, though I couldn't respond, my first true advocate. A woman in her 50s with 20 years of experience in the ICU, she spoke to me as if I could hear every word. Research suggests coma patients sometimes can hear, so she made it a point to narrate what she was doing as she changed my 4 bags or adjusted my position to prevent bedsores. "I'm just going to move your arm a little, Amanda," she would say. "We need to keep your muscles from getting too stiff." She read me news articles and sometimes chapters from books she was enjoying. "My daughter loved this one," she told me as she started reading a popular thriller. I couldn't respond, but somewhere in the darkness of my mind, I heard her voice like a distant lighthouse. Around the 3rd month, the hospital administration noticed an issue with my bills. Despite my health insurance coverage through my employer, there were mounting costs that should have been covered by my family. When the billing department called my parents, the conversations became tense. "We've maxed out our credit cards already," my father reportedly told them. "We can't keep paying for treatment that might be pointless." The hospital's social worker, Rebecca Chan, tried to explain that my insurance was covering most costs, but my parents became increasingly difficult to reach. Eventually, they stopped answering calls from the hospital altogether. Their final visit came 6 months after my accident. I was still unresponsive, though according to my medical charts, I had shown some basic brain activity that gave the doctors hope. My parents didn't speak to the medical staff that day. They sat in my room for less than 30 minutes. As they were leaving, a nursing assistant overheard my mother whisper to my father, "We need to move on. She would understand." After that day, they never returned. The hospital continued calling emergency contacts for my admission forms, but no one answered. Letters sent to my parents' address were returned unopened. It was as if they had vanished, or rather, as if they had decided I had vanished. Rebecca became increasingly concerned. She contacted my employer, who confirmed that my health insurance was still active due to my medical condition, but that my parents had already collected some kind of benefits as my next of kin. This raised Rebecca's suspicions, but without my consciousness or consent, there was little she could do but ensure I continued receiving proper care. Dr. Harrison, the neurologist overseeing my case, had seen families abandon patients before. "Sometimes the grief is too much," he explained to the staff. "They're in denial, and staying away is how they cope." But Elaine wasn't convinced. Something felt wrong about the situation. In my 10th month at the hospital, I began showing signs of emerging from the coma. First, it was just reflexive movements. Then I started opening my eyes, though not focusing on anything. Gradually, I began tracking movement and responding to simple commands. The medical team was cautiously optimistic. The day I fully regained consciousness was disorienting and terrifying. I couldn't speak because of the tracheotomy tube that had been helping me breathe. My muscles had atrophied despite the physical therapy the staff had performed on me. I was confused, frightened, and in pain. Elaine was there, holding my hand, explaining patiently what had happened. "You were in a car accident, Amanda. You've been in a coma for 10 months. You're at Massachusetts General Hospital. You're safe." I gestured frantically, trying to ask about my parents, about Brian. Elaine's face fell slightly. "We've been trying to contact your family," she said carefully. "They haven't visited in quite some time. Dr. Harrison explained my condition, the lengthy recovery ahead, and the extensive therapy I would need. He was kind but honest about the challenges I faced. What he couldn't explain was why my parents had abandoned me. That devastating reality would unfold in the days to come, as I grew strong enough to face it. Physical therapy began almost immediately after I regained consciousness. Jason Patel, my physical therapist, didn't believe in gentle starts. "Your body has been asleep for 10 months, he told me during our first session. "We need to wake it up, and it's going to hurt." He was right. Every movement felt like fire in my muscles. Learning to sit up unassisted took a week. Standing required a specialized frame and 2 assistants. The first time I tried to take a step, I collapsed, frustrated tears streaming down my face. "This is normal," Jason assured me. "Your brain remembers how to walk, but your muscles have forgotten. We'll remind them." His confidence bolstered mine. Each small victory, wiggling my toes on command, holding a spoon, standing for 30 seconds, felt monumental. I approached recovery with the same determination I'd brought to my coding projects. Break down the problem, solve it step by step, don't give up when it gets difficult. Despite my physical challenges, my cognitive functions were returning surprisingly well. My speech improved rapidly once the tracheotomy tube was removed. I still struggled with some short-term memory issues and occasional word-finding problems, but the doctors were optimistic about a substantial recovery. What I couldn't recover from as easily was the growing realization that my parents had truly abandoned me. No matter how many times I asked, no one could give me a satisfactory explanation for their absence. Brian too seemed to have vanished, which confused me even more. "Let me try to access my accounts," I told Rebecca 3 weeks after waking up. "I need to understand what's happening." Rebecca brought a laptop to my room. With shaking hands, I attempted to log into my bank account. Access denied. Incorrect password. I tried my email. Same result. My social media accounts were either deactivated or the passwords had been changed. "This doesn't make sense," I whispered, a cold dread spreading through me. Rebecca suggested we run a credit check. What we found was devastating. My credit score, once above 800, had plummeted to 520. There were multiple new credit cards in my name, all maxed out. A second mortgage had been taken out on my apartment. Personal loans totaling over $50,000 appeared on my report. None of these were transactions I had authorized. "Identity theft," Rebecca said grimly. "We need to report this immediately." But the nightmare was just beginning. When we contacted my bank, they informed us that my accounts had been legally emptied by my parents, who had produced power of attorney documents while I was comatose. My 401k had been liquidated, with massive penalties. The apartment I loved had been sold, along with all my possessions. Most shocking of all, my life insurance policy had been claimed. According to the insurance company, they had received death certificate paperwork and had paid out the $500,000 to my parents as beneficiaries. "But I'm not dead," I said, my voice barely audible. "I'm right here." The customer service representative was silent for a moment. "Ma'am, this is a very serious situation. We'll need to launch an investigation immediately." Further research by Rebecca revealed that my parents had moved to Florida shortly after claiming my life insurance. Social media posts, made by former friends who hadn't realized what was happening, showed them enjoying their retirement in a beachfront property, posting photos of a new boat and luxury car. They had stolen my identity, declared me dead, and built a new life with my money while I lay fighting for my life in a hospital bed. I remember the moment the full truth hit me. I was sitting in my hospital room, staring out the window at the Boston skyline. The buildings blurred as tears filled my eyes. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that it felt like a physical blow. I doubled over, gasping for air, as sobs racked my weakened body. Elaine found me like that, curled into myself, crying so hard I could barely breathe. She held me while I shattered, making no attempt to quiet me or tell me everything would be okay. She just stayed, witnessing my pain, offering the simple comfort of human connection when I'd discovered my family had none to give. After I'd cried myself into exhaustion, Rebecca came to my room with a visitor. Sarah Williams was a lawyer specializing in elder abuse and financial fraud. Her firm had a pro bono program for victims of extraordinary circumstances. "Your case qualifies as extraordinary," she said, her voice gentle but with an undercurrent of steel. "What your parents did wasn't just immoral, it was criminal. Identity theft, insurance fraud, possibly falsifying a death certificate, these are serious offenses." "I don't have money to fight this," I told her, wiping away tears. "They took everything." Sarah's expression hardened. "You don't need money. I'm taking your case for free. People like your parents don't get to do this and walk away." For the first time since waking up, I felt a flicker of something beyond grief and betrayal. It wasn't quite hope yet, but it was its precursor, the knowledge that I wasn't alone in this fight. My days fell into a grueling routine. Mornings began with speech therapy, where I worked on the occasional word-finding difficulties I still experienced. Midday brought physical therapy with Jason, who pushed me harder each session. Afternoons were split between occupational therapy, where I relearned everyday tasks, and meetings with Sarah to build our legal case. The physical pain was constant but evolving. Sharp, burning sensations gave way to deep aches as my muscles remembered their purpose. I graduated from the walking frame to a walker, then to a cane. Jason celebrated each milestone as if I'd won an Olympic medal. "Look at you," he'd exclaim when I walked 10 steps unassisted. His enthusiasm was infectious, making it impossible to give in to the despair that hovered at the edges of my consciousness. Cognitive therapy helped with my memory issues and the emotional trauma. Dr. Patel, a neuropsychologist with kind eyes and infinite patience, guided me through exercises designed to strengthen neural pathways and process what had happened. "The brain can heal from physical trauma," she explained. "But betrayal trauma requires different healing. Both are possible." Sarah worked tirelessly on my case. She hired a private investigator named Michael to track my parents' spending and movements. The evidence he uncovered was damning. Security camera footage showed my father entering my apartment with a moving crew while I was comatose. Bank records revealed systematic transfers from my accounts to theirs. Most disturbing was the discovery of a falsified death certificate, which we suspected had been created using a connection at a funeral home owned by my father's college roommate. "They bought a $750,000 house in Naples," Michael reported during one of our meetings. "Cash purchase. New Mercedes in the garage, 32-foot boat docked behind the property. They've been on 3 cruises in the past 4 months." Each new detail was a fresh cut. I tried to reconcile these actions with the parents who had raised me, who had attended every school play and soccer game, who had helped me move into my first apartment and celebrated my job offer with champagne. How could those people become these criminals? The hospital was legally required to discharge me, but I had nowhere to go. My apartment was gone, my possessions sold. Rebecca arranged temporary housing at a recovery center with an excellent rehabilitation program. My medical insurance covered most costs, and Sarah helped me apply for temporary disability benefits. The legal battle began in earnest when we filed charges against my parents. Their initial response came through a high-priced attorney who claimed they had acted legally as my next of kin, making difficult decisions when doctors suggested I might never recover. They were told there was little hope, their lawyer stated in a formal response. They made the painful choice to move forward, as Amanda would have wanted. This blatant lie infuriated me. Dr. Harrison immediately provided documentation showing he had always maintained that recovery was possible, if uncertain. The hospital records clearly showed no medical professional had ever suggested removing life support or ending treatment. The first major setback came when their lawyer claimed the power of attorney documents gave them legal right to manage my finances. Sarah fought back, arguing that power of attorney didn't permit them to commit fraud or claim life insurance benefits through falsified death certificates. As the court date approached, my nightmares intensified. I would wake up screaming, convinced I was still trapped in the coma while my parents dismantled my life. The recovery center staff would rush in, turning on lights and gently orienting me to reality. "You're safe, Amanda. You're at Riverside Recovery Center. Today is Tuesday." Despite these challenges, a supportive community formed around me. Elaine visited on her days off, bringing homemade meals that tempted my appetite when hospital food couldn't. Jason stayed late after our sessions, sometimes just sitting quietly while I processed the day's emotions. Rebecca coordinated with social services to ensure I didn't fall through bureaucratic cracks. Sarah became not just my lawyer but a fierce advocate and friend. The first contact from my parents came 6 months after I'd awakened. Their lawyer offered a settlement of $75,000, a fraction of what they had taken, if I would drop all charges. "They're hoping you're desperate enough to take it," Sarah said, sliding the offer letter across the table. I stared at the number, thinking of the $500,000 life insurance payout, my $100,000 in savings, my sold apartment and possessions, the maxed-out credit cards in my name. They had stolen well over $1 million of my money, and they were offering to return less than 10%. "Tell them no," I said, pushing the paper back toward Sarah. My hand trembled slightly, but my voice was steady. "Tell them I'll see them in court." My refusal of the settlement offer seemed to trigger a new level of aggression from my parents' legal team. Their lawyer, a shark-like man named Gregory Palmer, filed a motion claiming I was mentally incompetent due to brain injury and therefore unable to make sound legal decisions. "They're trying to get a guardian appointed," Sarah explained, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Someone who might be more amenable to their settlement offers." This required me to undergo extensive neuropsychological testing to prove my cognitive capacity. For 3 grueling days, I was questioned, tested, and evaluated. The results confirmed what I already knew: despite some minor memory issues, my cognitive functions were intact. The judge dismissed their motion, but the attempt left me shaken. Then came an unexpected breakthrough. Brian, my boyfriend whom I hadn't heard from since waking up, contacted Sarah's office. When we met at the recovery center, he looked thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervousness I'd never seen in him before. "I tried to visit you," he said, his voice breaking. "For months, I came to the hospital every day. Then suddenly your parents told me you had died. There was even a small private service. They said that's what you would have wanted." He pulled out his phone, showing me photos of a memorial service with my picture surrounded by flowers. When I saw a social media post months later about the insurance fraud investigation, I realized what had happened. Brian had been told he wasn't welcome at the funeral but had driven by the funeral home anyway, only to find no service taking place. When he'd questioned my parents, they threatened him with a restraining order. Confused and grieving, he'd eventually moved to Chicago to start over. "I thought I was going crazy when I saw that investigation mentioned online," he said. "I called the hospital immediately, and they confirmed you were alive. I booked a flight back the same day." Brian's testimony provided crucial evidence about my parents' deception. He also had saved texts from them discussing funeral arrangements that had never actually occurred. These messages directly contradicted their claim that they believed I would never recover. The case drew media attention. A local reporter ran a feature story titled "Betrayed While Comatose: Parents Fake Daughter's Death for Insurance Payout." The public response was immediate and overwhelmingly supportive. Former colleagues from Tech Fusion came forward, revealing that my parents had told them I had died and had even accepted a sympathy card signed by the entire company. Most damning was the discovery of my parents' social media accounts, which they had blocked me from seeing. Photos showed them on their new boat with the caption "New Beginnings," dated just weeks after they had stopped visiting me. Another post showed my mother holding shopping bags from luxury stores with the comment "Retail therapy is the best therapy," while I was fighting for my life. Their lawyer made increasingly desperate attempts to paint me as an ungrateful daughter. "The Williams made difficult choices during an impossible time," Palmer told reporters. "They believed their daughter was gone and tried to move forward with their grief. Now they're being punished for it." This narrative infuriated me, but Sarah advised me to remain silent publicly. Let the evidence speak for itself, she counseled. The truth is on our side. My anger and grief reached a breaking point one evening when, while packing the few donated belongings I had at the recovery center, I found a box Rebecca had retrieved from hospital storage. Inside was my purse from the night of the accident. Among the items was a small notebook I'd carried for jotting down coding ideas. Flipping through it, I found an entry from when I was 16. I had written, "No matter what happens in life, I know Mom and Dad will always have my back. They're the two people in the world I can trust completely." I sat on the floor, clutching that notebook, overcome with a grief so profound it felt like drowning. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was the shattering of a fundamental truth I had built my life upon. If my own parents could abandon me, profit from my suffering, and attempt to discredit me when caught, what foundations remained? Sarah found me there, helped me to my feet, and sat with me while I processed this new wave of grief. "You're going to face them in court tomorrow," she said gently. "You need to be prepared for how difficult that will be." I nodded, wiping my eyes. "I'm ready." But how could anyone truly be ready to face parents who had betrayed them so completely? As I tried to sleep that night, I wondered what I would feel when I saw them again. Hatred? Love? Both? Neither? The uncertainty was almost as terrifying as the confrontation itself. The courthouse was imposing, all marble and echoes. I gripped my cane tightly as Sarah guided me through security and into the elevator. Though I could walk unassisted for short distances now, the stress and fatigue of the day called for extra support. We had agreed I would use the cane in court, not as a sympathy play, but as a physical reminder of what I had overcome. "Remember, stay calm no matter what happens," Sarah whispered as we approached the courtroom doors. "Let me handle the legal arguments. When you testify, just tell the truth as simply and clearly as you can." The courtroom fell silent as we entered. I kept my eyes forward, not yet ready to look for my parents among the spectators. Judge Martina Diaz, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, presided from the bench. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her stenotype machine. Two court officers stood at attention near the judge's bench. Sarah helped me to our table. Only then did I allow myself to look across the room. My parents sat behind their attorney, both dressed in conservative, expensive clothing. My mother's hair was professionally colored and styled, her nails freshly manicured. My father wore a suit that probably cost more than a month's rent at my old apartment. The moment our eyes met, my mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's face drained of color. They had been told I was attending, of course, but seeing me, upright, alert, obviously not the brain-damaged invalid their lawyer had described, seemed to physically shock them. My mother actually swayed in her seat. Judge Diaz called the court to order, and the proceedings began. Sarah presented our case first, methodically outlining the timeline of events from my accident through the discovery of the fraud. She presented medical records, bank statements, and the falsified death certificate. Her voice remained professional, but there was righteous anger beneath her words. "Your Honor, the defendants didn't just abandon their daughter during her greatest time of need. They actively profited from her tragedy, going so far as to declare her dead while she fought for her life." When it was my turn to testify, Sarah helped me to the witness stand. I swore to tell the truth, then faced the courtroom. Under Sarah's gentle questioning, I described waking from the coma to discover I had been abandoned and financially ruined. "The first thing I asked about was my family," I testified, my voice steady despite the emotion tightening my throat. "I couldn't understand why they weren't there. Then I learned they had taken everything, my savings, my home, even my identity, while I was unable to defend myself." Palmer's cross-examination was aggressive, as we'd expected. He suggested my memory was compromised by my injuries, that I might be confused about what had happened. "Isn't it possible, Ms. Williams, that you misunderstood your parents' actions? That they were acting in what they believed was your best interest?" I met his gaze directly. My best interest would have been served by them being at my bedside, not on a cruise ship bought with my life insurance money. Palmer flinched slightly. "Your parents were told your condition was likely permanent. They made difficult decisions during a time of extreme grief. They were told no such thing, I replied. My medical records clearly state that Dr. Harrison always maintained recovery was possible. And it's hard to reconcile extreme grief with the social media posts showing them celebrating their new beginnings 3 weeks after they stopped visiting me. Throughout my testimony, I kept my voice calm and factual. The only time I faltered was when Palmer asked if I understood the strain my condition had put on my parents. I understand strain, I said, my voice finally breaking. I understand waking up to find the people you trusted most in the world had not only abandoned you but had stolen your very identity. I understand having to learn to walk again while fighting to prove you're not legally dead. What I don't understand is how the people who raised me to value honesty and integrity could do this to their only child. The financial expert who testified next detailed the extent of the theft, approximately $1.2 million total, including the life insurance payout, my savings, retirement accounts, the proceeds from selling my apartment and possessions, and the loans taken out in my name. When my parents took the stand, their stories were remarkably similar. They claimed doctors had told them I would likely remain in a vegetative state. They said they were overwhelmed by grief and medical decisions. My father insisted the power of attorney gave them legal right to manage my affairs. We thought we were doing what Amanda would have wanted, my mother said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. We couldn't bear to see her suffer. Then Sarah began her cross-examination. She produced the hospital visitor logs showing they had stopped visiting months before emptying my accounts. She displayed their social media posts alongside my hospital charts from the same dates. She presented the text messages to Brian about a funeral that never happened. With each piece of evidence, my parents seemed to physically shrink in the witness stand. My father's confident demeanor crumbled when Sarah produced bank records showing transfers from my accounts directly into their Florida home down payment. Mr. Williams, Sarah asked, her voice cutting, if you truly believed your daughter was not going to recover, why did you hide her condition from her friends and colleagues? Why tell them she had died when she was very much alive? My father's face crumpled. For a moment, he looked like the dad I remembered, the one who had taught me to ride a bike and checked under my bed for monsters. Then he broke. We made a terrible mistake, he said, his voice barely audible. The insurance money came and it seemed like compensation for losing her. Then one thing led to another. One thing led to another, Sarah repeated incredulously. You mean the cruises? The boat? The luxury car? Those things? My mother began to sob uncontrollably. When the judge mentioned that insurance fraud carried potential jail time, she actually slid from her chair to the floor in a dead faint. The court officers rushed to help her as the judge called a brief recess. When court resumed, Judge Diaz delivered her ruling. Her voice was cold with controlled fury as she addressed my parents. In 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a betrayal so complete or so calculated. You abandoned your daughter at her most vulnerable, stole her identity, and declared her dead for financial gain. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff. She ordered full restitution of the $1.2 million, plus additional punitive damages of $500,000. My parents received suspended jail sentences of 5 years each, 5 years of probation, and 2,000 hours of community service at facilities caring for coma patients. As the judge delivered the sentence, I felt no triumph, only a profound emptiness. I watched court officers lead my parents away, my mother still weeping, my father's shoulders slumped in defeat. These broken people were strangers to me now. The parents I had known and loved had died somewhere between my accident and their decision to profit from it. Walking out of that courtroom was the hardest step in my recovery, harder than the first physical steps I'd taken after the coma. It was walking away from who I had been and the family I had thought I had, into an uncertain future I would have to build alone. Recovery isn't linear. That's what Dr. Patel told me repeatedly during our sessions, and it applied to both my physical and emotional healing. There were days when I could walk a mile with my cane, and days when getting out of bed seemed impossible. There were moments of strength when I felt capable of rebuilding my life, and dark nights when grief crushed me like a physical weight. With the court case concluded and restitution ordered, I began the practical process of rebuilding. The first step was finding a place to live. Sarah helped me secure a small apartment with accessibility features, handrails in the bathroom, a shower bench, lower kitchen cabinets. It wasn't the home I had lost, but it was safe, clean, and mine. Tech Fusion, my former employer, offered me my job back when they learned I was alive. "Your desk is waiting whenever you're ready," my old manager told me. I started working remotely part-time, coding for a few hours each day as my stamina allowed. The familiar logic of programming was comforting, a world where problems had solutions if you just found the right approach. The hardest part was building a new concept of family. The people who should have been my foundation had proven to be quicksand. In their place, I found support from unexpected sources. Elaine invited me for Sunday dinners, introducing me to her grown children and grandchildren. Jason and his wife included me in their game nights. Rebecca checked in regularly, making sure I was navigating the healthcare system successfully. Brian and I cautiously reconnected. Our relationship had been fundamentally altered by our shared trauma, but there was still love there, buried under layers of grief and absence. We moved slowly, getting to know each other again over coffee dates and long walks as my strength returned. "I don't know who I am anymore," I confessed to him one evening as we sat on a park bench. The Amanda who existed before the accident died anyway. "I'm someone new now, and I'm still figuring out who that is." He took my hand, his touch gentle. "I'd like to get to know her, if she'll let me." Therapy remained a constant. Dr. Patel helped me process not just the betrayal but its implications for how I viewed trust, family, and my own identity. "You're experiencing ambiguous loss," she explained. "Your parents are still alive, but the relationship you thought you had with them is dead. You're grieving both the actual abandonment and the shattering of your understanding of who they were." The settlement money arrived, but it felt tainted. After paying medical bills not covered by insurance and setting aside funds for ongoing therapy, I made a decision about the remainder. I established a foundation called Second Chance, dedicated to supporting coma patients without family resources. The foundation provided comfort items not covered by insurance, tablet computers so staff could play patients' favorite music or audiobooks, and grants for families struggling with the costs of supporting their loved ones. Working on the foundation gave purpose to my suffering. I visited hospitals, speaking with families maintaining vigils similar to what my parents had abandoned. I trained as a peer counselor for trauma survivors. Helping others navigate their darkest moments helped illuminate my own path forward. 6 months after the trial, my parents' lawyer contacted Sarah. My parents wanted to meet with me. They had completed mandatory counseling as part of their sentence and claimed to have realized the full impact of their actions. After much consideration and discussion with Dr. Patel, I agreed to a supervised meeting at Sarah's office. Seeing them without the courtroom formality was jarring. They had aged years and months, my father's hair now completely gray, my mother's face lined with new wrinkles. They sat across from me, hands trembling slightly. "Amanda," my father began, his voice rough. "We can never undo what we did. We can never make it right. But we want you to know we are genuinely sorry." My mother couldn't meet my eyes. "We don't expect forgiveness. We just want you to know that we recognize the terrible harm we caused. The counseling has helped us understand the magnitude of our betrayal." I sat silently, observing them as if they were strangers, which, in many ways, they now were. "What made you do it?" I finally asked, the question that had haunted me for months. "Was it just about the money?" My father's shoulders slumped. "It started with fear. The medical bills were mounting, even with your insurance. We were afraid of losing our house. When the insurance company mistakenly sent a condolence letter with information about claiming benefits, it seemed like a solution. Then one deception led to another. We lost ourselves," my mother whispered. "We became people we never thought we could be. I didn't offer forgiveness that day. Perhaps I never would, at least not completely. But the meeting gave me something unexpected: closure. These flawed, broken people were not mystical figures who had inexplicably turned evil. They were humans who had made a series of increasingly terrible choices that revealed their true character when tested. As I continued healing, I came to understand that forgiveness wasn't something I owed them, it was a gift I could choose to give myself. Carrying the weight of hatred and anger was exhausting. Gradually, I learned to set down that burden, not for their sake but for my own. The most profound lesson came unexpectedly. Brian and I were having dinner at my apartment, celebrating my first full week back at work. As we talked about the future, tentatively, still afraid to hope too much, I realized something fundamental had shifted within me. I think the worst thing about betrayal isn't the pain, I said. It's the way it makes you question everything you thought you knew. Brian nodded, waiting for me to continue. But I've realized something. Yes, my parents failed me in the worst possible way. But look at everyone who didn't fail me: Elaine, Rebecca, Sarah, Jason, you. Complete strangers who became family when my actual family disappeared. Maybe that's the real lesson. Family isn't just about blood, it's about who stays when things are darkest. 2 years after waking from my coma, I still used a cane occasionally on bad days. I still had nightmares. I still flinched when insurance paperwork arrived in the mail. But I had built something new from the wreckage of betrayal. A life defined not by what I had lost but by what I had found. Strength I never knew I possessed. Friends who had become family. Purpose born from pain. The parents who raised me would always be part of my story. The parents who betrayed me would always be part of my scars. But neither defined the chapters one was still writing, chapters filled with resilience, compassion, and a deeper understanding of what truly matters. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal or loss? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember to like this video if you found strength in my journey, subscribe for more stories of resilience, and share with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible even after the deepest betrayal. Thank you for listening to my story. Your support means more than you know.